Welcome to the Proceedings Podcast. I'm Bill Hamlet, the editor-in-chief of Proceedings Magazine, and with me today is my co-host and fellow editor-in-chief. This is Eric Mills, the editor-in-chief of Naval History Magazine at the U.S. Naval Institute. Eric, happy Monday.
You too, Bill. It's deadline Monday for Naval History, so that's always a happy one, right?
Always deadlines all the time around here, and we're going to talk to an author today who is in the most recent issue of Naval History, the one that starts with War in the Falklands, the April issue, which is on newsstands today and in our readers' mailboxes and then on our website. Terrific issue. And so why don't I'll let you introduce our guest today.
Oh, well, we're really excited about this one. This is a unique and interesting story that had to be told. It's titled "The Mother of Cryptology," and that tells you everything you need to know about it. It's the story of Elizebeth Friedman, a pioneering cryptanalyst in the 20th century. She was at the forefront of every major development. She was like Forrest Gump in that she's there during World War I, the war against rum row and Prohibition, busting crime in the 30s and worked for the Coast Guard in the 30s, World War II. Just an amazingly fully lived life. And she also was a scholar in all sorts of different fields at the same time. So this is obviously a fascinating story. And just the person to tell it wrote it for us. And that's Ann Todd, who served in the Coast Guard herself and is a Naval Institute Press author as well. OSS Operation Blackmail is the book she did for Naval Institute Press. But today she's here to talk with us, coming live from the National Museum of the Pacific War in Fredericksburg, Texas, about her article, "The Mother of Cryptology." Ann, welcome.
Thank you.
So, kind of an unsung heroine, wouldn't you say, Elizebeth Friedman? It feels we appreciate what she did now. As you point out, a Coast Guard cutter is named after her. But in her time, she was buried in the pages of current events. She didn't receive her time.
Well, during when she was doing rum running for the Coast Guard, doing Prohibition, she was actually kind of a media darling. She made quite a few court appearances and whatnot. It wasn't until World War II when everything went dark when it came to code breaking, and no one knew what she did.
Yes. She had an unusual relationship with fame. She had a magazine and newspaper fame in the 20s, but then the really amazing stuff she does in World War II, she doesn't get any credit for. And you can tell us about that as we talk about it, but let's start at the beginning of this amazing life. Okay. Tell us about this person and where she came from and how she ended up doing what she did.
Well, she came from, as many heroes did, she came from the heartland and a Quaker family. Her father, she was a gifted student, but her father did not see why she should need to go to college. She talked him into loaning her the money to go to college. He charged her 6% interest. So she started out at Worcester College in Ohio, and then she transferred to Hillsdale in Chicago, Michigan, actually. She was infatuated with William Shakespeare. So she got to a library in Chicago and got her hands on an original folio of William Shakespeare's, and it just blew her mind, and she wanted a job there. The librarian put her in touch with an eccentric millionaire named George Fabian, who had his own think tank on acres and acres of land in the countryside. So she went to work for him because he was obsessed with proving that Sir Francis Bacon was the actual author of Shakespeare's sonnets. And, Francis Bacon worked with binary codes. So Fabian believed, it was all embedded in the in the sonnets. There was a woman working there who agreed with him. She taught Elizabeth the art of code breaking. Elizabeth met her husband there, who was a geneticist. I think they were drawn together by a mutual feeling that Fabian and his assistant were just nuts.
I'm glad to hear that. I never really liked that Francis Bacon was really Shakespeare theory myself, but at least it brought the Friedmans together. Why don't you tell us a couple? They became like pretty much they created analysis.
Well, they learned their craft. They got married in 1917. And so the Zimmerman telegram, as you know, was in 1917. And, it came into a little house in Galveston, by the way. Most people don't realize that. And all of a sudden, the military woke up and realized code breaking is a major issue of national security. So they wanted code breakers, and they couldn't find any. So I believe I read that there were 4 code breakers in the country, and Elizabeth and William were 2 of them. So the military descended upon Riverbank, which was Fabian's think tank, and Elizabeth and William were put in charge of the first serious effort at code breaking in this country, the military.
They were quite in demand in World War I, correct?
I'm sorry?
They were quite in demand in World War I, correct?
Oh, yes, absolutely. William began working for the Army Signal Intelligence Service. 1925, the Coast Guard, the Coast Guard Commandant, Frederick Ballard, I believe that's how you say it, he decided he wanted an intelligence center. So the Coast Guard, this was rum running time. The Coast Guard had a series of radio stations all along the East Coast for their search and rescue operations. But they had been picking up these messages. The rum runners were tapping into shipping and learning how to elude the Coast Guard. So they had a backlog of messages that needed to be decoded. And so they asked William to head it up, but he was busy with the Army. So the commandant brought Elizabeth on board, and she immediately began decoding these rum runner messages. And I mean, it was in no time at all that she had decoded 650 plus messages on 24 different radio frequency systems.
And this was sort of the height of what celebrity she did enjoy. She's in newspapers, magazines, but it's a sort of backhanded compliment one might expect in the 1920s. It's often framed in terms like it's so amazing
that this woman can do this.
Right. Yeah.
Look at what the little woman can do. Absolutely.
Yes.
Those were the headlines.
Yeah,
they, of course, focused on what she wore.
Right. It was kind of a novelty thing.
Yes.
Which is pathetic, but she really was quite multi-talented. Not only did she become a Shakespeare scholar, but a Mayan scholar. And, Mayan archaeology is all about trying to decipher those pictographs, which are really, to this day, they're still figuring out stuff about how to decipher them. That's a pretty amazing combination.
Yeah, that was a little later after Prohibition was over in 1934. Then the Coast Guard shifted to narcotics interdiction. And so, cocaine, heroin. And so that's what she was working on. And in fact, the Canadian Mounties hired her to figure out the codes from a Chinese agent. And she didn't know Chinese, but she just sat down with a Chinese dictionary and cracked it. And while she was doing that, she was trying to crack the Mayan Codex to pursue a master's degree in archaeology, just by the way.
It's just phenomenal. It's like Sherlock Holmes level
Mhm.
brilliant. And
Well, when she was in college, uh, you know, her father didn't think she needed college, but in college, she was an English major. But she also pretty much minored in Greek, Latin, applied science, and Shakespeare. So she was a real Renaissance woman.
indeed she was, and it makes for just fascinating reading. Bill, why
Mhm.
don't you
Yeah, it amazed me as I read this that she did not have a mathematical background, that she wasn't, trained as a mathematician. And today we think of, most code breakers, we think of the National Security Agency as, supercomputers and mathematicians. And her ability to crack codes was much more based on the linguistic repetition of letters and words and breaking those out within sequences, which it just fascinated me.
Well, that is interesting. She really wasn't good at mathematics by her own admission, but she had an intuitive gift for discerning patterns. And I'm sure your audience has heard of Alan Turing over in England,
Sure.
Alan Turing, how he created an encryption device, a bomb, they called it. And what he did was he essentially taught that computer to think intuitively, just like she does or did. And so, yeah, people usually think it's all about math. It's not. It's seeing patterns because apparently in any code, um, whether it's code, which is replacing words or groups of words, or cipher, which is replacing a number or a single letter, sooner or later it repeats. It comes full circle. And it all depends on finding that pattern where you see all of a sudden something jumps out at you because it's repeating. So that was her gift, really.
it really is a gift. You either have that or you don't. And
Yeah.
to have
Yeah.
the gift and then just refine it to the degree of success which she did, which had such an impact behind the scenes in 20th century history. That's the thing about this sort of subject matter. It's really
Mhm.
kind of what's going on behind the big story of history, And well, between Prohibition and the work she did in World War II, she kept quite busy in the 30s as well. Why don't you talk to us about that?
Well, in the 1930s and the interwar period, let's see. She did the narcotics interdiction. She cracked some cases. There's a famous one that she and William did together. Some Hindu separatists were communicating with Germany, who was helping them send weapons from New York over to India. William got credit for that and was asked to testify at trial, but one of the other separatists shot the defendant, so that didn't happen. Um, Canada had a rum runner no, this was narcotics, was down in the Gulf of Mexico and sailing under Canadian flag. The Americans, the Coast Guard, nabbed them. The Canadians said they were in international waters, and Elizabeth, in a famous trial, was able to show through her decrypts that no, they were definitely in American waters. So, some high-profile things like that she did.
Yeah, I mean, Hindu separatists and illegal deals with Germans behind the scenes. I
Mhm.
mean, it's like the stuff of a pulp magazine story from back then. It's really happened.
Sure.
Um, well, let's look at this a little bit. She and her husband, by just looking at it, had a wonderful, remarkable relationship together. They were kindred spirits. They had a kindred talent, and it was their synergy created modern cryptanalysis a little bit. But it seems all along he's getting credit and she's not. Is there any, do we have any sense of what that dynamic was like between them? I mean, I guess it's hard to tell if it's not in diaries or letters between them or anything like that. It just seems like a
From what I
disconnect.
can tell, it just didn't really bother her. Of course, who knows really, between married couples, but she was a beautiful woman. And so once the media really found her and decided they approved, then, she did get a lot of attention. What happened was in 1939, when it became clear that the Nazis were down in South America, and she was noticing a shift in messages, and everything went dark, including for William. I mean, their work just fell off the face of the earth. He got a lot of credit after the war. She got none, really. She got a little raise, I think. So you're right. I mean, she just didn't get credit, but from what I've read, she just didn't let it bother her.
She would just vaguely mention, "Oh yeah, I'm busy on some spy stuff," and just leave it at that.
I'm going to work on my Mayan Codex now.
Yeah, right.
Kind of thing.
Yeah. In a way, that makes her even more impressive. That
I know.
There's no vainglory in it for her. It's just focused on cracking those codes.
There's an excellent book about all the women who were pulled out of college right before World War II and put to work for the Navy and the Army on this code breaking. And no one knew what they did either. The book is Code Girls by Liza Mundy. I'll give a little plug for her book. Elizebeth wasn't the only one. She did arguably some of the most important code breaking, but there were many others. Most of them were school teachers because, for example, the Army, they wanted their women to have a college degree, and the only women at that time that had the opportunity really to have a college degree were school teachers. So a lot of them, worked at Arlington Hall for the Army. The Navy pulled them right out of class. They didn't even have to have a degree.
And can you tell the story about how Elizebeth came on the radar screen of Wild Bill Donovan, the founder of what became, the OSS and then the CIA, as World War II was kind of heating up?
Yes. Well, let's see. I think it was April 1941. J. Edgar Hoover all of a sudden wanted a cryptology unit for his agency. And so he borrowed her from the Coast Guard. And she became, at that time, a fixer. I mean, she was being borrowed from, for all the different agencies to come in and set them up a cryptology shop. And of course, Donovan, he had a bad reputation for poaching people from other agencies and from the military. People really didn't like him for that. But the Army and the Navy and the FBI, they really hung on to her and said, we're not sharing. So they're cryptologists. And so he picked on, the smallest organization, the Coast Guard, with their little, by this time it was called Unit 387, which she ran. And so he managed to get her for a couple of months, 2 or 3 months, I think it was. This was before the war. He was still the coordinator of information before it became OSS. But he brought her in and she worked day and night, borrowed some encryption machines, and got him set up with a really fine outfit there. She left one of her Coast Guard lieutenants in charge of it. Of course, after the war, this Lieutenant Leonard Jones got credit for setting up the OSS code breaking team. It's crazy. He got awards and all that stuff.
So there's a recurrent theme here, which is that Elizebeth Friedman does amazing work, and then other people, mostly men, get the credit for it.
So she just kept moving around. Whoever needed someone, she would go in, maybe with one or two people, set them up, train their agents, and then move on. She always wanted to be back with the Coast Guard, though.
Yeah, it's an interesting point that you make. It, despite the fact that her methodology was very intuitive and not mathematically based, but she was able to replicate it and teach others how to replicate that methodology so that it could, as you said, she was a fixer. She could go into OSS or go into the Army or the Navy or the Coast Guard or FBI and help them set up a shop where they could do this kind of cryptanalysis, and then they could replicate it and they could keep it going and be successful.
Yeah,
and we could move on to where the next problem was, which is, I think, particularly in that line of work, that could be. And I was a naval intelligence officer, so I know that there's successful organizations and there's those that aren't particularly successful.
Yeah.
But being able to help an organization set up a process and then that's pretty noteworthy.
Well, I'm sure you know that before all this started, especially before World War II, the Office of Naval Intelligence was kind of a dumping ground for people who were considered mediocre officers. Maybe they got seasick and couldn't go out on sea duty. So it wasn't until, Pearl Harbor, a little before, when they really became desperate for quality code breakers.
Talk a little bit, because it was a bit of the history that I was not all that up to speed on, but the Nazi network, if you will, in Latin America preceding World War II, and then even during World War II. What was her role in helping to uncover that, and then the U.S. was able to go and kind of clamp down on a lot of those Nazi operatives in Latin America and South America?
Yeah, it really is fascinating. I believe it was 1938, 1939, for the Coast Guard. Coast Guard had radio men down in South America, for their drug interdiction and whatnot. And she noticed a shift in the messages that were going back and forth between Germany, the U.S., I think it was New York, and Argentina and Mexico, and asking for sensitive information about shipping and factory capacity, things like that, things you would want to know if you're getting ready for war. And so she began really paying attention to that and uncovered a net of fascists, Nazis down there that were communicating and fomenting revolution in Argentina, trying to get Argentina to go pitch in with the Germans. And so, yeah, she uncovered all of that almost single-handedly, really. Thousands of decoded messages.
And was that communication, was that happening via high-frequency radio? Was it HF radio primarily?
It was. These were the ultra decrypts. People usually associate ultra with the Enigma machine, but actually ultra encompassed not only Enigma, but also radio intercepts. And so the intelligence she generated was mainly from the radio intercepts, although she did crack 2 Enigma machines in that on those operations.
Gotcha. And we have a question from Antonio Briccio. Are there any academic writings on her methods, or is there an Elizebeth Friedman school that has made an impact in non-military life?
At the end of her life, she began her memoirs. She didn't finish them. And as far as I know, there's not. I think William may have written some things. He helped crack the Japanese diplomatic purple code, but it ruined his health. He had a nervous breakdown. So I don't think he was really able to get a lot down in terms of instructions. But she taught so many people that basically I met some women in the NSA not too long ago, and they said, the culture of the NSA in terms of code breaking came straight from Elizabeth and the other women code breakers in the war. They just set it on its way, and that is so. I guess that would be the closest thing to a school.
Got it. Can you describe what that culture was? So the women that you met at NSA, how did they describe what the culture was that Elizabeth imparted to them?
The intuitive.
Ah,
Of course, NSA has amazing machines, but they had great respect for people who could come in. And again, it's seeing patterns. You can have all the algorithms in the world, but unless you teach the machine to see patterns, and that has to come from the human, then, you're not going to get very far. That's their impression of things.
that's fascinating.
Yeah, it gives hope to all of us who hated algebra. I still hate it.
Yeah. No, I love hearing about a genius code breaker who was not good at math. Believe me, that really
I
resonates.
know. Isn't it great?
Yes. Well, I'm really intrigued that after World War II, she goes to work for the International Monetary Fund for a number of years. Do we know what she did there?
Now, that information is really sketchy. I don't think it's classified, but she was a communications consultant. So,
Which
not
could mean
sure
anything.
what that meant.
Yeah, it could mean anything, right? It
Yes.
kind of makes you think there's more to that story than we know.
Uh-huh.
Well, why don't we, we've looked at how through this amazing career of accomplishment and important work for, in many a war front, figuratively and literally, all that she did, she didn't get the due she was deserved, but history finally came around and started to realize the depth and greatness of her contribution. Why don't you tell us a little about how that started to happen when that ball got rolling?
Well, as far as I know, it's basically after she died, as is often the case, people just putting things together, like Liza Mundy and Mr. Bennett, who writes for the Coast Guard. He unearthed a lot of this, and I just love that this cutter, Legend class cutter, is being named after her. And maybe y'all can tell me, is that thing online yet? Is it a real? Has it been launched?
I don't think it has yet. I looked that up when I was working on your story.
Yeah,
It's it's in the works.
I keep checking.
I was wondering if the Unit 387 history wasn't declassified in like 2008, and I bet that had a lot of
Yes.
proof positive of what this woman did.
Yeah, in fact,
didn't look at that until 2008.
there are memos and decrypts that other people took credit for, but down on the page you see her initials. So I've seen a couple of those.
Mm-hmm. Well, thank goodness history is never done, and there's always more to learn about it because the fuller story of the 20th century involves knowing the story of Elizabeth Smith Friedman.
No kidding.
As sort of a trivial note, because as an editor, this just kept catching my eye. It looks like her first name is spelled wrong.
Yeah.
An interesting little anecdote about that, right?
Yeah, her mother just didn't want her to ever be called Liza. So she made that be an E in the middle of her name.
It's Elizebeth, not Elizabeth.
Of course, what that meant was her name probably got misspelled her whole life. So
I almost corrected it.
Parents try to make these things happen, but
Yeah.
So I just checked, and the U.S. Coast Guard cutter Elizebeth Friedman, WMSL 760, is still being built. It was awarded in 2018, so I would imagine it'll probably be online in another year or two. But we'll be watching for that. And
Yes, I'd
that
love
is
to be there.
that is a great story. There was another point, back to Eric's point about how after after her life, that's when her work was kind of discovered, and she's got more credit. Described there were some notes and things that were done by her husband that also had her initials on them, correct? And that's how a lot of people kind of realized that that he didn't do a lot of this work alone, that she was very much a part of this partnership. And
Right. I mean, yeah, that's it. When these things were declassified, I'm an OSS scholar, and I don't know why more people don't write dissertations on OSS. Actually, I do, because even though the material's declassified, it's really hard to get through. Hasn't been arranged very well yet. The person who was working on it died in the archives. And so it's my understanding that all of her stuff, these pages that have been declassified, just because something's declassified doesn't mean it's easy to work with. And I have a feeling that's what's going on here, that it's going to take someone to really sit down and go page by page, find every single initial of hers, and make a flow chart of her accomplishments.
Yeah, is that CIA OSS archives, or is that within the National Archives now?
The OSS declassifications are that collection is in the National Archives at College Park.
Gotcha. Okay.
Yeah, I mean, thousands of documents, boxes and boxes. I spent 4 years in those boxes for one woman.
Well, yeah, like you say, the fact that they're declassified is just the beginning.
Oh, yeah.
Beginning. It's like everything's known now. Now the work begins of going in there and finding all the history that's still been unwritten. And well, again, she's a very compelling historical figure, and just the idea that she broke a Chinese code with a Chinese dictionary, just sitting there, and that plus her genius for seeing patterns. I ask you to speculate, if Elizebeth Smith Friedman were here today, what would she be able to achieve with the technology that exists now that didn't exist in her time? I mean, it seems like the sky would be the limit.
Yeah, although for her, it was a great deal of patience. I can't stand puzzles myself because I don't have the patience. But I don't think it would matter if it was a machine, a supercomputer, or an iPhone or whatever. If she got on the trail of something, she would just follow it to the end. It might not take her nearly as long, but she was lightning fast. So I can't even imagine, really.
Yes, she was fast, but she was also incredibly industrious. She and her crew worked around the clock for Bill Donovan,
Yes.
and they cracked those codes within a matter of weeks.
Yes.
Which is just phenomenal.
Yeah.
Just
Now,
phenomenal.
and I don't think it really exhausted her. Like I said, William, of course, cracking the purple Japanese code in the spring of 41, the pressure was immense. And he just couldn't take it. I don't know if she ever felt that kind of pressure, or if she just, her little Coast Guard unit, they were sort of just their own bosses, and often it's not like someone would lay a big task on them, like, you've got to crack purple so we know what the Japanese are doing. She was the one who would find things and bring it to the attention of others and say, look, I'm seeing a shift in tone here. I'm seeing dots that are getting connected and they don't seem right. So, she would create her own projects, really. That's a whole different kind of pressure.
Mm-hmm. Well, I can't thank you enough for bringing her story to a wider audience through the pages of Naval History magazine.
It's a lot of fun.
Yes, indeed. And it's a pleasure to have you in the magazine, and we hope to see you in it again.
Thank you.
Your book for Naval Institute Press, was that about Betty McIntosh?
Sure was.
Oh, yes. I got to meet her.
Did you?
I bet you enjoyed writing that book because she was quite an
Oh,
amazing
yeah.
person.
You know, I knew her the last 5 years of her life, and she's extraordinary. Just an unassuming little woman. Lived to be 100. So smart, so funny. And, you know, the day of 9/11, she called up the CIA and demanded to be put back to work. So from her little retirement community, she was a delight and a pistol.
I look forward to reading your book on her as well. For those listening and viewing, Betty McIntosh was in the OSS in World War II, and she wrote the best-selling Naval Institute Press book, Sisterhood of Spies, which I recommend if you're interested in this topic. And I have to this day the OSS patch that she gave me.
Oh, you lucky thing.
I know. Nice little possession to have. Well, thank you again, Ann, so much for the article and for joining us.
Oh, the pleasure was mine. This was delightful. Thank you.
And also a great thanks to the National Museum of the Pacific War for hosting this podcast on our guest's end.
Oh, absolutely. These guys have been great. Really just great. This is an awesome museum. If you haven't been here, come check it out.
Yep. If you like the kind of things that Naval History publishes, that's a museum that you need to have on your list to get to at some point, as do we all.
Yep.
Well, thanks again. And on behalf of Bill and myself, bid you farewell. And thanks for a great podcast, Ann. It's been a wonderful pleasure talking with you.
Yeah, this was fascinating and a great article. All right. Well, that wraps up another episode of the Proceedings podcast. We'll ask one more time, if you enjoy the podcast, if you enjoy what the Naval Institute does, please join us. Go to usni.org/join, because our members are the foundation of everything we do at the Naval Institute. Until next week, have a great one.